My name is Elena, and this is the story of how my husband tried to use his law degree to take everything I built and how I made sure he lost a whole lot more than the divorce. It started with a password, not a dramatic confrontation, not a screaming match in the kitchen, just a password. My company's internal financial portal, the one Marcus had never once shown interest in, suddenly rejected my login on a Tuesday morning. I assumed it was a glitch. I reset it, logged in, and thought nothing of it. But that night, when I was brushing my teeth and half asleep, something nagged at me. Marcus was a family law attorney. He knew exactly how businesses were valued in divorce proceedings. And he had been unusually attentive lately, too attentive, the kind of attentive that comes with an agenda. I told myself I was being paranoid. We had been married for 7 years. He was my husband. But I couldn't sleep. 3 weeks before that Tuesday, I had come home late from a client dinner to find Marcus on the back porch, speaking in a low voice on his phone. The moment he heard the sliding door open, the call ended. He smiled at me warm, easy, completely natural, and said it was a client emergency. I believed him. He was a lawyer. Emergencies happened. But I remembered that smile now. And something about it felt rehearsed. The next morning, I started paying attention. I noticed that Marcus had started bringing his laptop to the home office and closing the door, which he had never done before. I noticed that he had changed the PIN on his phone, something I only discovered by accident when I tried to check the time and his screen stayed locked. I noticed that whenever I mentioned the company, even casually, he changed the subject within 30 seconds. Little things, easy to explain away individually, but together they formed a picture I didn't want to see. I was the founder of a small but profitable digital marketing firm. I had started it at 26 with 2 clients and a laptop at the kitchen table. By the time Marcus and I got married, I had 12 employees and a lease on a real office in downtown Austin. By our 7th anniversary, we had 41 employees, 3 major retainer accounts, and a company valuation that my accountant had just updated to $2.3 million. I was proud of what I had built. It was mine, entirely mine. Incorporated before the marriage, funded by my savings and my sweat. Marcus knew this. He had watched me build it. He had celebrated every milestone with me, which is exactly why, when I found the email, my hands went completely cold. He had left his laptop open on the kitchen counter. He never did that. I walked past it to reach for my coffee mug, and the screen was on and the subject line in his open inbox stopped me where I stood. Valuation review. Threshold Digital Confidential. My company's name. In my husband's email. Marked confidential. I looked toward the hallway. Silence. He was in the shower. I had maybe 4 minutes. I leaned in and read. It was a chain between Marcus and someone named Griffin Cole, a name I vaguely recognized from the business community, but couldn't immediately place. The most recent message, sent 2 days ago, read, valuation confirmed at 2.1. Once she signs the post-nup, we move forward with the acquisition framework. Timeline still on track. Post-nup. I straightened up. I picked up my coffee mug. I walked to the living room and sat down very carefully, the way you sit when you're trying not to shatter. My husband was not just planning to divorce me. He was planning to walk away with my company. I put the mug down before I dropped it. The shower turned off. I heard him moving around in the bathroom, the familiar sounds of our morning routine, and I understood with perfect clarity that I had a choice. I could confront him right now, while my chest was tight and my vision was slightly blurred with rage. Or I could do exactly what he thought I wouldn't do, nothing. Not yet. I forced myself to breathe. I forced myself to smile when he walked into the kitchen in his dress shirt, kissing me on the cheek like it was any other morning. Sleep okay? He asked, pouring his coffee. Like a rock, I said. That afternoon, I called my attorney. Her name is Sandra, and she has been my corporate counsel since I incorporated the company. I told her I needed to meet in person, not on the phone. She heard something in my voice and said she had a cancellation at 4. I walked her through what I had seen. I told her about the password reset, the closed doors, the phone PIN, and the email. I told her about Griffin Cole. Sandra was quiet for a long moment, tapping her pen against her legal pad. Then she said, Griffin Cole runs a private equity firm that specializes in acquiring small to mid-size marketing agencies. He buys them below market, restructures, flips. He's done it 4 times in the last 6 years. I stared at her. Your company was founded before the marriage, she continued, and you've maintained separate ownership structure. so Marcus has no legal claim to it through standard divorce proceedings. But a post-nuptial agreement that restructures asset classification could change that, especially if it's drafted by someone who knows exactly what language to use. He's a family law attorney, I said. Sandra set her pen down. Elena. He literally writes these agreements for a living. The room felt very small. She leaned forward. Here's what we're going to do. You're going to go home tonight and act completely normal. You are not going to confront him. You are not going to mention the email. And you are absolutely not going to sign anything he puts in front of you for any reason, under any framing. Meanwhile, I'm going to make some calls. I nodded. And Elena, don't use your home Wi-Fi for anything related to this. Use your phone on cellular only. I drove home feeling like I was moving through water. Marcus was already there, making dinner, asking about my day. I told him about a client meeting. I asked about his. We ate together at the table where I had built my company in the early years, and he poured me wine, and I smiled at every right moment, and inside I was completely hollow. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay in the dark and made a list in my head of everything I needed to do. The first thing Sandra did was pull Marcus's professional records. As a licensed attorney in Texas, every case he filed was a matter of public record. What she found was that Griffin Cole had retained Marcus's firm, not Marcus personally, but his firm on a business matter 18 months ago. The engagement had closed, but the relationship existed. There was a documented connection. The second thing she did was bring in a forensic accountant named Paul to audit my company records for any sign of unauthorized access. Paul found something within 48 hours. A third-party login to my financial portal from an IP address that traced back to a co-working space 2 blocks from Marcus's office. The login had occurred 4 times over the past 6 weeks, always between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., when Marcus typically had a long lunch break. Someone had been inside my company's financials, reviewing receivables, client contracts, and the most recent valuation report. The third thing Sandra did was call a colleague who specialized in matrimonial law to advise on protective measures. Based on her recommendation, I quietly transferred the company's primary operating account to a new business account Marcus had no access to, and I updated the signatory authority on all major contracts. Everything was done legally, everything was documented with timestamps, and everything happened before Marcus made any formal legal move. I also changed my will. I was calm about all of it. I surprised myself with how calm I was. Then, on a Thursday morning, exactly 11 days after I found the email, Marcus sat down across from me at breakfast and said he had something he wanted to talk about. He slid a folder across the table. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice measured and careful, "that we should probably get our financial arrangement more formalized. Just for protection. Estate planning, that kind of thing." I opened the folder. Clean formatting. Precise legal language naturally. I read the first page without expression. By the third page, it was clear. This was a post-nuptial agreement that reclassified my company shares as marital property in the event of dissolution. He had drafted it himself. Or someone had drafted it for him. I closed the folder. "You want me to sign ownership of my company into the marriage," I said. "Not a question." He leaned back, easy and confident, spreading his hands in that particular gesture lawyers use to make something unreasonable sound reasonable. "It's not ownership, it's classification. It just means we're a team. Everything we have is protected together." I looked at him across the table. 7 years of marriage. And he was sitting there with a folder he had probably drafted weeks ago, delivering lines he had probably rehearsed. "I'll have Sandra look at it," I said pleasantly. Something flickered in his face. "Just for a second. It's pretty standard language," he said. "I'm sure it is," I said. "I'll still have her review it." He didn't push. But over the next few days, he brought it up 3 more times in different ways. Casual, practical, once even framing it as being about our future. Each time I gave him a neutral non-answer. Each time I watched his jaw tighten slightly before he smiled. 2 weeks later, I was served. The process server came to my office, which I was fairly sure was deliberate. Marcus knew my schedule and knew I would be there. The petition was thorough and aggressive. Dissolution of marriage, claim on marital assets including my company shares, request for spousal support based on income disparity. He had also attached, as an exhibit, a letter from Griffin Cole's firm expressing interest in acquiring Threshold Digital, establishing, I assumed, that the company had significant transferable value as a marital asset. He had planned this down to the exhibits. I sat in my office for 10 minutes after the process server left. Then I called Sandra. He filed, I said. I know, she said. I got a courtesy copy from his attorney 20 minutes ago. Elena, are you ready to fight? I've been ready for 3 weeks, I said. What Marcus didn't know what he couldn't have known, because I had been very careful, was that Sandra had spent those 3 weeks building something he hadn't anticipated. She had documented every unauthorized access to my financial portal. She had pulled the metadata on the post-nuptial agreement he'd drafted, and found that it had been created on a computer registered to Griffin Cole's firm, not to Marcus personally, and not to his law office, which meant a third party had participated in drafting a document Marcus had represented to me as his own work for our mutual protection. That was a problem. Specifically, it was an ethics problem. In Texas, an attorney cannot facilitate a transaction in which a third party with a business interest uses the attorney-client relationship to benefit themselves at the client's expense. Marcus had represented to me, his wife, that this post-nuptial agreement was for our protection. Meanwhile, it had been co-drafted by the man who intended to buy my company at below market value immediately following the divorce. Sandra filed our response and, alongside it, a formal grievance with the State Bar of Texas. The day after the grievance was filed, Marcus called me. I was in a client meeting. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 3 words. We need to talk. I didn't call back. What happened next I expected, because Sandra had warned me. When a person realizes they're losing control of a situation, they escalate. Marcus's attorney filed a motion claiming that my transfer of the company operating account was an intentional dissipation of marital assets. They wanted a financial injunction that would freeze my ability to make any business decisions while the divorce proceeded. The motion was aggressive, and I suspected, designed not to succeed, but to cost me time and legal fees. My assistant Priya came into my office that afternoon and closed the door behind her. She had been with me for 4 years, and she knew something was wrong without my having to tell her. Elena, she said carefully, there are people calling the company asking if it's true we're under new ownership. I looked up. Marcus's assistant has been talking, she said. The story going around is that you're going through a messy divorce, and the company is going to be sold off. I felt the familiar surge of anger, the kind that burns clean and cold. He was trying to destabilize my client relationships, make them nervous, create the instability that would justify a lower acquisition price. It was honestly impressive, in a terrible way. I spent the next morning personally calling every one of our top 15 clients. I was direct. I was going through a personal matter, the company was not for sale, operations were completely stable, and they would have my direct number for anything they needed. 12 of the 15 sent follow-up emails expressing their continued confidence and support. 2 asked if I was okay. 1 asked if I needed a referral to a good divorce attorney, which almost made me laugh. Sandra, meanwhile, filed a counter-motion opposing the injunction and requesting sanctions against Marcus's attorney for filing a motion without evidentiary basis. She also submitted the forensic accountant's report documenting the unauthorized portal access, demonstrating that my financial moves were a direct response to a documented breach, not an act of dissipation. The judge denied the injunction. Marcus was required to pay our legal fees associated with defending it. I wish I could say he stopped there, but a man who has built an entire strategy over 18 months doesn't abandon it because of one setback. 3 weeks into the divorce proceedings, Sandra called me on a Sunday evening. Her voice was controlled in the way it gets when she's containing something serious. Marcus and Griffin Cole have jointly filed a formal complaint with the court, she said. They're alleging that your company's financial records were falsified prior to the most recent valuation, that you artificially inflated revenue figures to increase the company's assessed value, and therefore your negotiating position in the divorce. I sat down on my kitchen floor. Not dramatically, my legs just needed a moment. The complaint includes supporting documentation, Sandra continued. Spreadsheets, transaction records, correspondence. Paul is reviewing them now, but at first glance they're well put together. If the court takes this seriously, we're looking at a potential fraud investigation. And Elena, if that investigation gets opened, even temporarily, your major clients will hear about it. This was the move. This had always been the final move. Not the divorce, not the injunction. This. A fraud accusation that would follow me even after it was disproven, because mud has a way of sticking. I pressed my hand flat on the kitchen floor and breathed. Are the documents real? I asked. No, Sandra said, and I heard something sharpen in her voice. Paul identified the problem within 2 hours of seeing them. The transaction records, they submitted reference 3 specific client invoices, but those clients didn't retain us until 4 months after the dates listed on the documents. The paper trail they fabricated predates the actual client relationship by a third. I exhaled. Someone built a convincing forgery, Sandra said. But they didn't account for the fact that I have the original contracts. Time-stamped, countersigned, filed with my office. Silence. Sandra, I said. Yes? I want to go on a fence. There was a brief pause. Then, I was hoping you'd say that. What followed were 2 weeks of work I will always be grateful for. Sandra filed a motion demonstrating the fraudulent documents with irrefutable evidence, the original client contracts, the digital metadata on the forged spreadsheets, and a certified statement from Paul detailing the timeline impossibilities. She simultaneously filed a defamation suit against both Marcus and Griffin Cole for submitting fabricated evidence as part of a coordinated scheme to damage my professional reputation. And because the bar grievance had been working quietly in the background this entire time, the state bar notified Marcus that a formal disciplinary hearing had been scheduled based on the original ethics complaint, the co-drafting of the post-nuptial agreement, with a party who had a direct financial interest. Its outcome, Marcus's attorney filed to withdraw from the case 4 days before the hearing. I heard about it from Sandra in a text message that just said, "His lawyer quit. Seeing you Thursday." Thursday, the final hearing. I dressed carefully that morning. I'm not sure why it felt important, but it did. I wore the blazer I had bought to celebrate my company's 5-year anniversary, dark green. Structured. The one Marcus had once said made me look like I owned the room. He was already seated when I arrived. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, he was the same, but something about the way he was sitting, slightly forward, slightly braced, made him look like a man waiting for something he knew was coming. His new attorney, a solo practitioner he had found at the last minute, stood and attempted to maintain the fraud allegation, despite the evidence against it. He was composed, professional, and arguing a position that had already been dismantled in writing. Sandra stood and walked the judge through it methodically. The forged documents, the metadata, the client contract timelines, the IP address logs from the unauthorized portal access, the co-drafted post-nuptial agreement, and the bar complaint. She laid it out in the same tone she might use to describe a weather pattern. Calm, factual, complete. The judge took 12 minutes to review the submitted materials. The fraud allegation was dismissed with prejudice. Marcus was ordered to pay all legal costs associated with the false complaint. The original divorce petition was restructured to reflect that my company remained my separate property, as it had always been, because the attempt to reclassify it had been made in bad faith and under fraudulent circumstances. Marcus did not look at me when the gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon light was doing something beautiful over the Austin skyline. I stood on the steps for a moment and just let myself feel it, the particular quiet that comes when something you've been bracing for finally stops. Sandra stood beside me and said, "The bar hearing is in 6 weeks. Based on what we submitted, the likely outcome is a minimum 2-year suspension, possibly permanent disbarment given the fraud component." I nodded. "Griffin Cole's firm is also under review," she added. "Depending on how the bar proceeding goes, there may be grounds for a civil fraud action against him independently." I looked out at the street. People walking, taxis, a food truck with a line out the door. The ordinary city, doing its ordinary thing. "What do you want to do?" Sandra asked. I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the Tuesday morning with the password. The back porch phone call I had believed was a client. The folder slid across the breakfast table with such careful confidence. 18 months of planning, dismantled in 3 weeks because he had made one mistake. He thought I wouldn't notice, and then he thought I wouldn't fight. "Let the bar do its work," I said. "And yes, file against Cole." Sandra smiled. "Already drafted." I went back to the office that afternoon. My team was there, working. Priya had coffee waiting. 2 clients had sent contracts for new projects. The company that Marcus had tried to take from me was exactly where I had left it, doing exactly what I had built it to do. That evening, my best friend Cassidy came over with takeout and a bottle of champagne she had apparently been saving for this specific occasion. We sat on my back porch, the same porch where I had heard Marcus on the phone that night, and she raised her glass and said, "To building things that can't be taken from you." I clinked mine against hers. Later, after she left, I sat alone with my laptop and opened the company's dashboard. Revenue, active clients, project pipeline, everything I had made from nothing. Still standing. I scrolled through it for a long time. My phone lit up with an unknown number. I looked at it for 1 second and blocked it. I closed the laptop and looked out at the yard, the oak tree we had planted the first year in this house, the lights from the neighbors' windows. Everything quiet. Here's what I know now that I didn't fully understand before. The most dangerous thing you can do when someone underestimates you is prove them right by panicking. Marcus had counted on my emotional reaction. He had counted on fear, on tears, on a confrontation he could control. Instead, I gave him 3 weeks of normal breakfasts and pleasant conversation, while I quietly made every move he hadn't seen coming. That patience was the only thing that mattered. Not the anger, though the anger was real, and it was valid. Not the hurt, though, that was real too, and it will take longer to resolve than any legal proceeding. But the decision, made on a sleepless night while my husband breathed easily beside me, to be smarter than my circumstances. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt the ground shift under you without warning, if you've ever looked across the table at someone you trusted, and seen something that turned your blood cold, I want you to know that the most powerful move available to you is the one they're not expecting. Be quiet, be careful, be precise, and when the time comes, be completely ready. That's where the power is. Not in the confrontation, in the preparation. I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where staying calm was the hardest thing you did and the most important? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. There's more to come. Until next time, stay sharp, stay protected, and never let anyone else hold the pen to your story.